All right. Well, the good news is it's 5 o'clock on the West Coast, so now we get to actually go and look at the stuff that I do know and I am good at. So here is what we're gonna do. I am just going to find my Teams window over here and share my screen, and we'll get started off with what we got going on. So let me see here. All right. Welcome everyone to the Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group meetup for Thursday, February 22nd, where we're going to be looking at data flows once we get through a couple of other things that we're going to talk about first. So first off, let me just see if I can actually get onto the screen so I can advance my slides. Today's meetup, we've got Roland Szirmai with us. We'll get to Roland's presentation in just a bit. We got a couple things to go through first. The first, of course, as always, is a big thanks to our sponsors that make this happen. SkillWave is the training company that myself and my partner Matt Allington run, where we teach you how to be better in Excel and Power BI and all good things business intelligence. Excel Guru is the parent company of SkillWave and also the distributor and developer of Monkey Tools, which is my Excel add-in to help you build better data models faster and just make your overall Excel experience better. Our next meetups that we have coming up, the Excel track is yours truly. We're actually going to be talking specifically about what's new in Monkey Tools, and I'm actually going to be releasing a new feature for that meetup or during that meetup as well. So if you're interested in seeing what's out there, talking a little bit about the features that I do already share and how we can improve your productivity, you should definitely check this out. Our Power BI track, we've got Tim is going to be joining us. I'm not even going to try and pronounce Tim's last name until I actually get to chat with him about it. But obviously, we got some cool stuff coming up here with Power BI and Power Automate, and that's going to be fantastic, I'm sure. I always love seeing these tools get together here. All right. I also want to just throw out there a quick note for those of you who may be interested on this. We have actually just rebranded my Self-Service BI Bootcamp. Is now known as the Self-Service BI Academy on SkillWave, and we did this to reflect the fact that the program has been expanding and covers a lot of information on there. This is a fantastic program if you're looking to learn how to use Excel and Power Query, Power Pivot, Power BI, all these things together. It's a huge program, has Ask Me Anything coaching sessions that we held 23 times a year. You get access to Monkey Tools, my books. Like, this is a pretty intense program. There's all kinds of good stuff here. If you really want to learn to master your data, you should definitely check this out. And until February 27th, you can actually save 20% off the registration price with the code that you see on your screen here. This slide deck, by the way, has already been uploaded to the meetup site. So if you don't have a chance to grab the code, you can always go and download it and grab it there as well. If you or somebody in your organization needs more fundamental skills going in with their Excel, learning how to use your core formulas, pivot tables, data visualization skills, and some Power Query, we also have a program here called the Excel Fundamentals Bootcamp, which is specifically targeted at filling knowledge gaps and teaching people how to use these great tools to get you ready for more advanced analytics as well. So this is another program that you can check out, which comes with coaching and all kinds of good stuff as well. This meetup, along with every meetup, is recorded and will be hosted on the SkillWave YouTube channel. Once again, on this one here, I will post this. I'm going to actually post this early next week. I'm actually, believe it or not, on vacation right now. So I'll be producing this and releasing it on Monday, but be aware that it will be coming. Once it is ready and to go, we will post to the meetup site so you get a notification to let you know when it is available. If you're looking for a couple of cool little videos to go and see some Power Query tricks and some pivot table tricks, you can check out our Monkey Shorts videos. These are 3 minutes of technical content or less end to end, so they're real quick bite-sized tips and tricks on how to do different things. And you can check out the full playlist at on our Monkey Shorts playlist at our SkillWave YouTube channel. And finally, the last thing that I want to throw out there is if you'd like to get involved and come and speak to our meetup, like Roland did, as a matter of fact, we would love to have you on our show. Just fill out the little speaker form here, and we will get in contact with you to put everything together and get you here to show some of the cool things that you're doing with Excel or Power BI or anything really in the power stack of tools that Microsoft offers us. And on that note, that is what I have for today for my intro. I'm going to turn the floor over at this point to Joseph, who is back to give us the version of our what's new in Power BI for this month.
I am indeed. Thank you, Ken.
No worries.
let's do this. Alrighty. Yeah, well, welcome everybody. Another month, and we have our first Power BI feature release of 2024. There wasn't one in January. I did sort of a quick recap of December at last month's meetup group. So this month I actually have a feature summary blog to go through, and we can look at some of my favorite features from this month. As always, a great starting place. I don't have time to go through over everything, all the new features available in Power BI for this month. So if you do want to check out the full list of what's new in Power BI, or even just like look at some of the things I'm able to get to in a little bit more detail, definitely recommend checking out the blog here. And right at the top, actually, we have a few selected key highlights from this month. The first of which is this visual calculations. And if I scroll down a little bit, we can see visual calculations here. This is huge. This is DAX. This is making DAX way, way, way easier to write in Power BI. So this is actually sort of the theme of the what's new in Power BI of my session for the next like 10 or 15 minutes or so is going to be very DAX focused. So I think with that, let's jump into my Power BI report to look at visual calculations. So if we have a table here like this, so we can pop that out. No, we can't. If we look at it here, we have client age down the rows and we have total balance. And like a pretty common use case when we have a table or a matrix of data is we want a running total. So we just want like a cumulative sum that we want to, for each row, we want to add the value of the current row as well as the previous rows as well. And writing this in DAX or doing this in Power BI is actually really tricky for such a common use case. Obviously, it's easy in Excel. In Power BI, it's a little bit trickier. And so this is a use case that our new visual calculations can solve just super easily. And it's been what, 8 years in Power BI, and now we can do this. So if I click into this table visual, up on the ribbon here in the Home tab, under calculations, where we've had like our measures and quick measures for DAX, we have new calculation now. So the scope of these calculations are just applied to a specific visual. Essentially what we're doing is we're creating a DAX measure within a visual. It's not part of the data model. It's not part of our report. It's just for this visual. So if I click on new calculation, we see that we go into Spotlight view for our table visual, and down here we're able to start defining in a formula bar what our calculation will be. So we can just start typing in and coding, but if I hit the formula button here, we get a drop down in the IntelliSense of all of these new visual calculation formulas that are available to us. So I'm going to start with running sum for my first example. And what I really like about this is it actually brings up a template for us. So we see that we have a running sum formula, and we have this like field placeholder that we can just replace with the actual name of the column or the measure or whatever that's in our visual. So the name of mine is total balance, and we have sort of tabbed through that quite quickly, but we have IntelliSense. It recognized the name from our data. I'm able to rename this if I want. Instead of running sum, I can call it RT for running total. And once I hit the check mark, we see that that's added down here in this little preview area, and it's added into our visual as well. And if I head back into, let's zoom back in. If I head back into our report, we can see that we have this running total just like that added into our visual. And we can see that we have our visual calculation added to our values in our visual well over to the right-hand side here. So I think that mind-blowing. If you've worked in Power BI and you want to do things like running totals, this is super easy, really similar to adding it in like a pivot table in Excel, for example. So let's go back in and let's add another one. So one of the ones that I like is percent of parent. So right now we just have client age, but if I add client type onto rows as well, we see that we have different segments of clients, so like young clients or youth, regular clients, young adults, golden, etc. And from the drop-down, we have this percent of parent that maybe we want to know how much each of the individual age bands contributes to this client type total. So once again, we can just select from the drop-down. We have this template provided to us that we just need to replace some of these values. So we have total balance once again. We're going to replace total balance on this field as well. And then for axis, we can replace this with rows. Right now, I only have rows because we're working in a table. We want to the parent and the children of the parent, we want to, collapse down the rows. But it is possible if we are in a matrix visual that we want to collapse across the columns of the matrix. So we can define exactly what we want in this measure. So we want rows. If I hit the check mark here, and just like that, we can see we see some zeros here in our actual visual because we're collapsed down. We see 81 and 18, and we can see the more granular detail in our preview down here. So one of the limitations at the moment for these visual calculations is we can't format them in the same way that we format like our DAX measures or our quick measures. But if I click back into our percent of parent from our actual visual here and go to edit calculation, let's just rename this to percent of total. But one thing I can take advantage of is the format function from DAX. So we can add additional sort of DAX functions and flavors to these templates. So I can wrap our percent of total template measure or a calculation rather that we created with the format function, and I just want to format this as a percentage. So hit the check mark here. Now it's formatted as a percent. The zero changes into just a little bit less than 1% total. And if I go back to the report, just like that, we're able to add these really quick and easy visual calculations. And so this is a preview feature right now. We do have to turn this on, but I think this is super cool, and I'm really excited to see how this will be iterated on and improved in the coming months, as well as I'm sure that it will be. So that's really that was the most impressive, in my opinion, new feature from this month for the February feature release. And staying with the DAX theme a little bit, I realized that last month I sort of glossed over one of the new features from Q4 of last year, which is the DAX query view in Power BI. And so this is, well, we have a new view. We haven't had a new view for a while, so this is cool. We have a report view, data view, model view, and now we have this DAX query view. And what this does is it brings some of the power of external tools like DAX Studio into Power BI desktop natively, which is super cool. So we're now able to actually run DAX queries on data within our Power BI desktop. So I'm not going to have time to go over all of the features, even just within this view. There's so many sort of cool, even little cool hidden things. But what I like about this is that if I just open up a new query down here, first of all, we can have multiple queries, and they expand over just like new pages, I guess, in our Power BI report. And all our queries are actually saved within our report as we run them, just like report pages and other elements of our report as well. So every DAX query has to start with, we need to use a few keywords. It's a little bit different than writing DAX measures and calculated columns or even table functions. These are a different flavor of DAX once again. So we're going to start with the evaluate function here because we want to evaluate a query. And one of the things I find this really useful for is actually returning either like table functions or functions that return a column or a single row of data, stuff that wasn't really easy to return the results for in Power BI before. We would either have to create a calculated table to look at the results. We'd have to go to like an external tool like DAX Studio, or we would have to sort of do sort of like interim steps in like a table visual or something like that and build a few different DAX measures. But now I'm able to evaluate even just something like the values function. If we want to return the values of like our client segment, as an example. If I just run this, now we can see we're actually returning like a table of data as our query. So I think this is really cool. We also have the option to like comment and uncomment our queries, to format our queries like this. So we get like the indentation done for us, which is great. It makes all our queries a little bit more readable. But we can do some more like things that are a little bit more complicated as well. Like we can use the summarize columns as an example. So I'm going to bring back our client segment. Maybe I want to look at year from our date table. And I want to look at our number of clients. Is it non-clients? Count of clients. Oh. No, it was non-clients. Okay, there we go. And let's run that. And let's format our query and run that. And so we can see that we have our client segment, we have our dates, and we have our number of clients measure. Oh, it is count of clients. Okay, sorry. Let's do count. There we go. Count of clients there. And we need to alias this. So let's say number of clients. There we go. I was referring to an actual hidden column in our fact table as opposed to the DAX measure, which is count of clients. So now if I run that, that looks better. Now we see that we have a row for each of our client segments, a year, and then we have a number of clients. And we can actually just return these summarized tables of data from our data model. We don't need to create visuals to do this. We can just query our data just like in SQL, as an example, when we're creating a database, we can do the exact same thing in DAX, and it's once we work through some of the quirks, it's pretty readable and it's cool. But outside of just querying our data and getting in and looking at like combinations of columns and stuff like that, one thing I really like is that we can actually define measures within this query view as well. So if we use this define keyword, maybe I want to calculate like number of clients, but only for a particular year, let's say 2019. So I want to define a measure. We can call this measure clients. Let's say clients 2019. And we can say, let's put it on our fact table. And we can say this is equal to, we want to calculate our count of clients measure, where we want to filter our date table, where the year is equal to just 2019. Close two brackets. Let's format this so it's a little bit easier to read. Now when we run this, let's add this to our evaluate statement. So we'll say clients 2019. And we can actually add this measure that we've defined within our query, clients 2019. It's available in the IntelliSense. Now when we run, we see that we have an additional column for a measure that we defined within our query. It's not actually in our fact table, in our data model, in our report. It's just something that we defined in our query. And now we can see the results of that to go through. And as we're defining measures, we can like check to see if it's working and stuff like that. Let's order by year to make this a little bit easier to read. There we go. So it's all happening within the year 2019. And what I really like is when we define a new measure, we have the option here. Do we want to update our report data model and add this new measure? So we can see in our fact table, we have our count of clients measure, mean balance, total balance. I don't have this clients 2019. When I click on this, As always, there's a little bit of the idiot check. Are you sure you want to do this? This cannot be undone. You can't use Control Z, or Control Z, which I love. I love. You can't just sort of hotkey your way out of it. If we update our model, now we see that we have a new measure. Our client 2019 measure has been added to our data model from something that we defined within within our DAX query view of our report. So it just makes working with DAX a lot easier in Power BI Desktop. So I'll end the demo there. We've looked at our visual calculations, which is defining DAX measures specifically within a visual. And we have a lot of these new sort of template functions available to us. And we can see how we can speed up or enhance our DAX development within Power BI with the DAX query view as well. So I think with that, I'm happy to wrap it up there and to throw it back to Ken. And we can start with the feature presentation. So thank you everyone for your time. And those have been two of my new favorite features from this month and from the end of last year as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. I appreciate it. Always fantastic. And yeah, now I'm super happy to welcome Roland Szirmai to the show. And we've got a presentation from him on DataFlow. So Roland, the floor is yours. Let's see what you got.
Thank you. Just really quickly, let me switch over to the right screen. Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to talk about DataFlows, one of the not so new features of Power BI, but it's definitely something that worth exploring if you haven't done that before. And before I jump to the slides, I wanted to mention that if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the chat. I try to keep an eye on the chat as well, and yeah, try to answer them as soon as possible. So before we jump in, just a little bit about me. Now, I used to be an accountant, but please don't hold that against me. I literally spent all of my professional life in different analytical roles, whether it's financial, FP&A, commercial business, you name it. I tried so many of them. And essentially, what I really enjoy is working with business people, not necessarily just IT or finance. Now, saying that, I also very much prefer to spend time in analyzing the data rather than just creating, validating, refreshing reports and all of that, because it's much more enjoyable than just doing some of the dull processes that we have to do. Now, on top of that, I'm the creator of Bilingual Analytics. You can find me on social media platforms. I share online tutorials. On top of that, I also provide Power BI training and consulting work, mainly here in the APAC region. I forget to mention that I'm dialing in from Sydney, from the beautiful and sunny Sydney. And I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Now, with that said, before we even jump into what is a data flow and how can we use that, I want you to have a look at this screenshot and tell me whether it looks familiar or not. Feel free to use the emojis or just send a thumbs up in the chat if that looks familiar. So essentially what we have here is multiple data exports to Excel, whether it doesn't really matter from which tool, but let's just assume someone from Power BI exported the data, created a very important report based on that export at a certain stage. Then we get a new month, new date, whatever, update for the data, then an updated version of the report, another updated version, then something that we call final, and then obviously a final export of the very important report. Now, obviously, someone at some stage is going to create a copy of that, but essentially what we have here is an issue of data source in a sense. So making sure that we have a single source of truth would potentially fix these kind of problems. Now, the other side is when actually working with the same data source, but every single employee needs to go through multiple data transformation steps. Whether they want to do that or they are forced to do that, that's a different question. Most of the cases, I can tell you, especially if you're talking about the business people, they are forced to go through data transformation steps that they are potentially not that familiar with. So if any of this looks familiar, I have some good news for you. DataFlows can actually help you to fix the majority of this issue. So let's cover really quickly, what is a data flow? Now, this is the official definition and official screenshots from Microsoft, but essentially, let's put that aside. Now, when we say data flow, that's essentially Power Query Online. It has the same functionalities, or almost exactly the same functionalities as Power Query. You can connect to different data sources, you can transform your data, you can use a data flow in Power BI Desktop or in Excel, if that's what you choose. And there are also some really good stuff that we're going to cover today when it comes to data flows. Now, as always, with probably every single Power BI feature, some of the features are currently only premium only. The good thing is that at least you can use a gateway to access on-prem data. So once again, very similar to Power Query on the number of different ways of connecting to the data and the existing connectors that you can utilize. But something that I really, really want to emphasize on is that it's a cloud-based solution. Now, one of the many things that I've seen before is that someone in the business has to create some master data transformation steps. Now, in many cases, it means that they have to have a really solid machine to be able to go through all the data transformation steps. Now, once you put that into the cloud, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. So if they only have like a basic entry-level laptop or machine, they can utilize the power of data flows when it comes to the data transformation steps. So we're going to cover a project that I faced back in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, and that was the initial kickoff, in a sense, for my love and passion for data flows. Now, there was a project of creating a new report, but as always, in a corporate environment, priorities have shifted, and I had no time to update, fine-tune the report. I still received constant push from the business that it's very useful, that you can actually make data-driven decisions using that report, and they really want to see more frequent updates. So I was brave enough as a BI developer and asked the question, if it's really important, why don't you refresh it yourself? Like, you don't have to wait for me to update this report. So what if I hand this over to you? What if I hand this responsibility back to the business? And you know what? They actually said yes, they're willing to do that. But obviously, I have to provide a nice and easy to use interface, because they didn't really want to go through all the hoops of creating data transformations, data massaging, and the visuals. So essentially, we agreed on that. And I was lucky enough because the data was super easy to work with. It came from a third-party data provider, something that we purchased, in a sense, some market data. And it was a relatively simple model. We only had like 1 or 2 dimension tables on top of the calendar table, obviously. And the fact table was like customer, product, date, and sales and quantity information. So once again, very easy, but I'm not saying that it cannot be more complex. We moved everything to OneDrive or SharePoint Online, just to make sure that it's accessible for everyone from the business side, especially those who are going to be or are responsible for refreshing the report. And essentially I created a data flow for them, which means that they don't have to worry about the data transformation steps. And whenever they have new data, because they're aware of when they get the new data, they just chuck in that piece of Excel file into a SharePoint folder, and using some Power Automate smarts, the underlying data flow will update, then the data set, and the report is updated. So essentially, automated that whole process. So we're going to do some demo today, and I'm really hopeful that the demo gods are going to be looking out for me today. But essentially, we're going to cover of how to create a data flow. We're going to create that data flow live. We're going to use multiple queries in a data flow, and we're going to reference that data flow in a Power BI desktop file to create a report. Then we're going to publish that report. We're going to mimic the acquisition of new data, so new monthly data coming in, and then we're going to refresh the report inside of service, Power BI service, without opening Power BI desktop. Now, obviously, I'm going to use some dummy data, but it doesn't really matter. It's more about the concept itself. And with that said, let's jump into this. Let me switch my screen over here. Perfect. So here we are in my demo workspace. And essentially, I just click on the new button and select DataFlow. Now, most of you, if you haven't even started with DataFlows, are going to be a little bit lost at this stage. Define new tables, link tables from other DataFlows, import models, or attach a CDM folder. Now, all of this probably sound unfamiliar at first, but let's just focus on the define new tables feature to begin with. And if we click on the add new tables and wait for it to load, now some of you probably already noticed the most important thing with DataFlows. At the top left corner, we have Power Query. Now, as I said, DataFlows are essentially Power Query online, being able to use all the great stuff that we've been exposed to in Power Query editor using desktop or even Excel, and do that online. So you have different options that you can use different connectors, and Microsoft is working really hard to get feature parity. So essentially making sure that whatever option we have available in Power Query editor will be available in Power Query Online or DataFlows as well. You can connect an Excel workbook, you can connect Pocket files, but today, as I said, today's example is going to be a SharePoint folder. Now, as I said, let me just jump over to OneDrive or OneDrive folder. I have my files here. Essentially, I have transactional details for 2021, 2022, and I also have dimension tables here, sitting here, very, in a sense, basic and nicely formatted for the star schema for our purposes. Now, let's just copy paste the URL. And obviously, we have to get rid of the funky stuff really quickly. Just like that. We are going to click on Next. And now we are connecting to a SharePoint folder. And once again, if you look at the preview, it's essentially the same as Power Query Editor. So I saw questions popping up. Question 1, let me just address them really quickly. Doesn't take Power Query or why doesn't Power BI Service take Power Query over to DataFlows? That's a really good question. If I understand the question correctly, so the question is why, how come that if we publish a report and a semantic model to the service, it will remain as a Power Query instead of DataFlows? I cannot answer that question, but what I can tell you that if you really want to, you can literally copy paste the M code from Power Query Editor to a DataFlow, and 99.9% of the time it will work. So if you want to make the switch, that's going to be relatively easy. Yes, a lot of connectors. And as I said, they are working on adding more and more to get that feature parity. Question number 2. You need to create a gateway if you are accessing. So the question was, DataFlows to work, do you have to create the Power BI gateway? Yes, if you're accessing on-prem data, you definitely need a gateway. Good questions. So before we move to the next page, yes, good. So once again, very similar interface, and let me just double check. We have under the DataFlow files, DIM tables. So what we can do, as always, we can start working with our data. So when it comes to the folder path, I'm just going to say contains DIM tables. Just like that, filtering it down to the two tables, the customers and products table that we're going to use. And I'm just going to start with the products table for the time being. So essentially, once again, going through a very similar exercise that you would do when you're trying to access a SharePoint or file in SharePoint, file in OneDrive, and you go through the same steps. We can also rename the query. So we are working with product this time. And look at that. Essentially, we exported one single Excel spreadsheet with product details. Now, let's just say for the time being, I don't really going to need for this demo all of these fields. So I'm just going to select them and remove. So I'm only going to keep a handful of those, the product ID and some hierarchy for them. Really easy, really, once again, exactly the same experience that you would get from Power Query Editor. Now, as I mentioned, you can also create, you can also connect to the full folder and create that, that whole, let me just remove this, combining data from a folder experience. So you know how we like to combine data in a folder. Now you can do that as well. So once again, I'm just going to copy paste this. Unfortunately, the Teams pop-up is actually sitting there. So it was a little bit more challenging to copy the relevant URL. But once again, let's just jump back to OneDrive and have a look. Now I call this data file. So this is where my transactional details sit. And once again, just really quickly opening up one of the files. As I said, we have a sold to ID, an item ID or product ID, quantity sold, and date. So very, very simple, very easy model. Now, once again, we are going to use the whole SharePoint folder. I'm going to call this sales. And when it comes to the folder path, once again, just a quick reminder, data files, text filters, contains, I'm just going to select data files. Just double checking, yep, those are the four files that we are going to work on today, and hitting the combine button. Once again, we are going to get a very familiar experience. And one of the reasons why switching from Power Query Editor in the desktop or in Excel is super easy, because the experience that you see is exactly the same, or 99.9% the same. I saw a couple of questions, or one question at least, popping up. So let me just have a quick look at that. Yes, that's a really good practice in some cases. So testing Power Query in Power BI Desktop using Power Query Editor. And once you are happy with what you created, and once again, let's assume that you have a very, very powerful machine, copying the M code over to DataFlows, that's a good way of testing all the data transformation steps. Another one. Yes, Tim, let me come back to that question probably in a couple of minutes. It's all about collaborating using DataFlows. But a really good question. Just if I don't answer that in the next 10 minutes, please feel free to remind me in the chat, because that's a really important question. So as I said, we are just going to combine those files, essentially create a sales query where we are combining monthly, weekly, yearly files, doesn't really matter. And just as I mentioned before, It's doing the same job that you would normally get in Power Query Editor using the desktop. So let's just wait for it to load. And essentially, same stuff if you look at the queries on the left-hand side, exact same stuff. So once again, making the switch from desktop, from Power Query Editor to Power Query Online or DataFlows, going to be very easy. Now, what do we have here? We have item ID. What do we have in the products table? Do we call this item ID as well? No, we actually call it product ID. So let's just make sure that in the sales table, we have item ID. In the products table, we rename this to item ID as well. So once again, some just basic data transformation steps that you would normally do just to ensure that the next steps when we create the report are going to be easier. I'm not going to add any additional tables here or dimension tables. Sales products should be super easy. We have the right types, perfect. So I'm just going to hit save and close. Now it's validating all of my queries. Once again, these are not very difficult queries to validate. So obviously it went through really easily. And now we need to save this data flow. So one thing that I would suggest when you create a data flow is to make sure that you give it a really good and quick to understand name. Now the reason behind it is because data flows are all about data reusability. So it's no longer, the data transformation steps are no longer linked to your machine, to the PBIX file that you are working on, to the Excel file that you are working on, maybe saved on your desktop. It is going to be available for a larger audience. So for this, I always suggest giving a very friendly name, but for us, I'm just going to say VanPUG DataFlow test. The other thing that you can do to streamline the understanding of this whole data flow and the data that sits inside of it is to create a description or add the description to this data flow. Now, once again, because we are talking about data reusability, it can significantly help everyone in the organization to understand what sort of a data is going to be available there. So once you save that, you have the option and you need the option to refresh the data flow. So essentially what we created right now is just the data transformation steps, but we want to make sure that in that data flow, we have the data as well. So once you click on the refresh, it is going to go through all those data transformation steps, use the information, use the data, and store that data inside of that data flow. Now, as I mentioned, data flows are a really good way of sharing the information. So we've done the first step, creating a data flow, and then the next step is using the data flow in Power BI Desktop, for example, to create a report. So let me switch over really quickly to Power BI Desktop. And I'm also going to, beautiful. Now, I also saw one question after Tim, so give me 1 second. From a best practice, would you recommend that data flows are implemented for dimension tables or fact tables as well? Give me another 5 to 10 minutes, probably 15, I would say, or 10. And when it comes to best practices, I am going to answer that question. But there are some very easy wins, I should rather call some very easy wins when it comes to data flows and what are the best practices. So here we are in Power BI Desktop, and we click on Get Data and select Data Flows. So what we have here, we need to select which data flows are we going to utilize. So I created in a workspace. It's under BILA Report Workspace, and you can see here we have the products and the sales table. So what would normally happen if you just connect to the raw data, whether it's a folder or an Excel file or a SQL view, whatever, you potentially would click on the Transform Data button straight away, right? Because you want to go through data transformation steps. remove the columns that you no longer need, enhance the information with whatever details you want to enhance. But if you consolidate and move those data transformation steps to a central location, a data flow, you can click on the shiny green TL button. I think it's probably TL rather than green. So you no longer need to do any sort of data transformation purely because it's being done. It's already done in the data flow. So essentially, the only thing that you have to do, whether you are a report developer or you're sharing this with your business stakeholders, with business users, they can connect straight to that data. They don't have to worry about cleansing it, none of that stuff. Just use as is. Now, if we were smart enough, and we were luckily, Power BI with the auto detect relationship option enabled also identified that we have a connection between the item ID in the products table and the item ID in the sales fact table. So essentially, I wanted to show you that once we make sure that those columns, those fields have the same name, using the auto detect relationship in Power BI, your users don't even have to worry about creating relationships. It's still something that you have to create, making sure that those relationships are there to be able to slice and dice our data. But once again, if you help them as someone who's really good with data transformations, help them to create a data flow, those relationships will be there immediately. Now, really quickly, today is not about data visualization. So let's just create, let's say, let's go with a matrix. Just really quickly adding dates, for example, and just year, quarter, months, maybe. Just expand that and add a quantity sold. And maybe for the product, I think group. Yeah, group should be fine. So what we have here really quickly, once again, today is not about data visualization, so don't worry about that. We are only going to use a matrix. It's all about data flows and the data the benefits of using data flows. So you can see that we have data in 2021, we have data in 2022 up until April. Let's say we're happy with this, and now I can publish this report, save properly. And publish it to our workspace. Now, while it is being published, let me just have a quick look at the questions. So the users should have access to that workspace, right? Yes, obviously, if they wanted to use this data flow, they need to have access to either to the workspace or the data flow. But I think one of the best practices that we're going to talk about is making sure that those data flows are sitting in a centrally located place. So if you have a finance data flow, an HR data flow, maybe you can put all of them into a same workspace and then assign users to individual roles in a sense, or whoever needs to access those data flows. Now you can also daisy chain or chain them, but that's not part of the intro session. Good. All righty. So with that said, now it's published. Let's switch back to Power BI Online. So luckily, I've done all the right things. And now we have quick refresh. You can see our beautiful report, right? So we have the same stuff that we've seen before. Absolutely fantastic. Now, we created the data flow. We went through all the data transformation steps that we needed to ensure that our users can create actionable, insightful reports like the one you see on the screen. So the next step is making sure that whenever new data comes in, it will be a piece of cake to refresh the report. And they don't have to wait for us, Power BI developers, analysts, and the like, for that report refresh to happen. They don't have to share whatever data they received. They will be able to do that on their own. So how can we do that? Very quickly, just jump back to our folder, and I'm going to open up the data from 2022. I'm going to save a copy. I'm going to call this 05. So essentially mimicking data acquisition for a new month. Now, I'm not too worried about all these details. I'm just going to say rand between, and we are in 2022, 5th of the 1st, and also 2022, 5th of the 30th. So essentially just really quickly switching over those dates. That coming back, refreshing, just making sure, beautiful. Now we have the new Excel file there. So once again, what I did here is just mimicking new data acquisition, assuming that we have a new month or a new week, and we added that new file to the SharePoint folder, OneDrive folder, or wherever you place that data. Now, one thing that I usually forget to do when it comes to live demos, and I really hope that I will be able to do this time, going into the DataFlow itself, and when it comes to the credentials, just making sure that I'm logged in, and hopefully, yep, there is a pop-up window, and logging in using my credential. Beautiful. So again, hoping that the demo gods are going to be very friendly with me today. I'm just going to hit refresh on the DataFlow, not on the semantic model. And I really hope for the best. Now, while it's refreshing, I'm going to have a quick look at the chat. So one thing that I missed, where this DataFlow is saving, it is saving to ADSL2. So it's something that's in a sense managed by Microsoft by default. It's going to be a shared ADSL2 place, but you can bring your own stuff. So it's really important if you have very sensitive data and you wanted to make sure that the data sits in your central location, you can bring that key in as well. Now, if I have a quick look, seemingly it was updated. So I'm going to refresh the model as well. And if we did all of that right, look at that. I refreshed the report using DataFlows without opening Power BI Desktop. Now, I know that for many of you, for BI developers, it may not sound like a huge deal, but imagine from now on, if you set up everything correctly, you will be able to hand over some of these tasks to your business users. They don't have to wait for you. They don't have to hassle you to refresh a report, to save a file to a dedicated folder, a dedicated drive, or whenever they know that the data is updated. Wait for you to be available to open up Power BI Desktop, hit refresh, wait for the refresh, publish the report, and all of that. They will be able to control all of this. And that's something that's absolutely priceless. And just like in the very first or second slide, once you create this data flow, once you create a central ultimate source of truth, you can eliminate those multiple Excel versions of the exported data and the super important report being updated on a weekly basis, monthly basis, because new data is available, new data exports were created, and all of that. Because even in Excel, they can they can use the data from a data flow. They can connect to a data flow and use the clean data that you have worked on or they have worked on. And in case of Power BI, if they are already using Power BI to create their own reporting, as you saw it's really easy and really quick to connect to a data flow and just utilize the up-to-date clean data that's available there. And I think it's in a corporate environment, it's really important to remember that the least amount of time people need to spend to get the data, to acquire that clean data, is absolutely priceless, because they are potentially salespeople, operational people, HR, marketing, you name that. They don't really want to work with data cleansing. They want to get the data, the clean data, the most up-to-date data, and start analyzing it. Now, with that said, now is the time to talk about some of the questions. And I think Tim, let me just scroll back up. Yes, Tim, it was you. So one of the, in a sense, a slight limitation currently with DataFlows is how you collaborate. Now, by default, if we open up the settings, a DataFlow is going to be linked to a single employee or a single user ID. I should rather say to a single user ID. Now, if there are multiple people, multiple developers working on the same data set or semantic models or data flows, it could be a little bit tricky to collaborate. There are a couple of options, and none of them are perfect. I'm not going to say none of them are perfect. But if you log in, or if you would log into to this data flow with a different user ID, we would see a button to take over the data flow. Now, that means that currently, as you can see, it's using my credentials to connect to the raw data, connect to the different data sources. But if someone else comes in and they hit take over, their user ID will be used to connect to different sources. Now, it's not a huge issue, but it also means that at the same time, only one user can edit a data flow. Once again, I don't really think it's a huge problem. It could be on certain occasions, but once again, that's something to be very mindful of. Now, another way to collaborate, and I think, yes, that's something that Tim mentioned in the chat, the takeover of the data flow. Another way to work around this issue is when it comes to a data flow, the data flow itself, you have the option to export a data flow. So all the data transformation steps, all the funky stuff that you have done there can be exported, and someone else can import that data flow. Now, obviously not to the same workspace, because that would create some issues with naming convention. But essentially what can happen is that, let's say one of your colleagues are working on cleaning the products table, the other one is working on creating the customer or cleansing the customer table. The two of them can work together utilizing two different data flows. And once they are done with their work, they can share the M code, or they can export certain bits and pieces. Once again, it's not ideal, but it does the trick. You can always literally copy paste the M code from a data flow back to Power BI desktop, work on it, and then copy paste the code back to a data flow. The good thing is Microsoft is aware of this limitation, and based on what they say, what they communicate, they are working on a possible solution to that. But yeah, that's a really good question, Tim, and yeah, it's worth mentioning. All right, then just going through the questions. What happens to a data flow if a user is removed from the org? It's still going to work as long as the user ID itself is there. Now, if the user is actually deleted from Entra, it is going to fail because there's no connection there's no connection for that user. So it will be a better option to take over for someone else. But make sure that whenever you create a data flow, you clearly communicate that to your business as well, and potentially IT or the other developers inside of the organization. Now, another question that we had, and let me just switch back to my slides very quickly, was about best practices. So I would say there are a couple of places where DataFlows can prove a huge value. Now, one of those things are common queries. So I think, let me just scroll back up. I cannot find this question right now, but someone asked whether we should do just the dimension tables or fact tables in DataFlows, or move those to the DataFlows. Now, if you want to start utilizing DataFlows, I would say that the best way to get started is to create a date table. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with different dates or different calendars, I should rather say, but there is the regular calendar, the one that we can find on our fridges or on the walls. There is different financial calendars. For example, here in Australia, the financial year starts at the 1st of July. In New Zealand, it's the 1st of April, if I'm not mistaken. We can also look at different retail or ISO calendars, so 445, 544. And those are, most of the time, business users are aware of what they mean, but they don't necessarily want to create those calendar tables. So one way to help them, and once again, this is a low-hanging fruit, create a central calendar table that's meaningful to your organization. And once you do that, everyone in the organization can benefit from utilizing that table. And the other thing is, as I mentioned, the single source of truth. So if you no longer want them to start exporting data from the beautiful Power BI report that you created, help them and create a data flow. And some of those advanced users who are willing to create their own reporting, willing to create their own analysis, can use that as their starting point. Now, the other thing is ugly data. And in some cases, and I'm fairly certain that many of you have been exposed to this, you receive really super duper ugly data. Now, that means that the transformation steps, the data transformation steps, are probably not just changing headers, deleting columns and stuff like that, but you have to do unpivoting, sorting, indexing, ranking, you name that. Now, if that's the case, I would strongly urge you to start utilizing DataFlows, because then, once again, you as a pro data conditioner can create the ultimate source of truth for the business, and they don't have to worry about any of those data transformation steps. And during one of the presentations when I was talking about DataFlows, someone asked a question about why shouldn't we just simply use SQL views? Now, my initial reaction was that most of the business users are not going to have access to SQL. They're not going to have the option to use a SQL view. But even if they do, there are potentially some additional data cleansing step that needs to happen, or enhancing the data that sits in SQL with certain details that they have sitting on their machine. Now, if that's the case, they cannot really utilize a SQL view, which could be an alternative for the data flows. So those are the low-hanging fruits, best practices that I would suggest to think about when you start looking at and working with data flows. So in summary, and I'm just going to really quickly show all of these, data flows can help you to reuse data, and not just any kind of data, it's clean data. So you as a developer, someone who's really good at conditioning the data, can create clean data and share with the whole organization. And not only that, but you have the option to certify or promote a data flow, meaning that it will be 1,000,000 times easier for your report users, your report consumers, or anyone within the organization to find those golden pieces of information. Now, it can also speed up the report refresh because obviously you are removing or the data transformation step from the actual report itself. So you can run those refreshes whenever you want to run it, for example, automatically at 3 in the morning, and it's just a really good practice to follow. You can also automate reporting, once again, because a DataFlow sits in the cloud. You can use Power Automate very easily, refresh that on a daily basis, monthly basis, weekly basis, and then kick off some additional steps like refreshing the semantic model, send out a Teams notification that, hey, the data is now updated, DataFlow has been updated, and all that good stuff. And from my perspective, once again, the original, the main reason why I started to explore DataFlows is to be able to hand back some of these processes to the business, and they will own those reports. Now, all of this helps you as a developer, as an analyst, as someone who works in the BI space to work more time and spend more time on analyzing the data rather than all the other bits and pieces that still need to happen. So you are not going to be a data creator or a report refresher in that sense. Now, with that sense, that's all I had for you today. And something that I like to end my presentations with a quote. And once again, using that very specific project that I was working on, I found this quote quite relevant. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. Now, one of the outcomes that I wasn't anticipating at the very beginning of creating a DataFlow was actually increasing the BI maturity within the organization. Using a DataFlow and walking my stakeholders through the process of cleansing the data made them realize that it's not just clicky, draggy, droppy. It's not as simple as, can you just chuck in an extra field and show me whatever extra pieces of information we need? Someone needs to work on it, and someone has to ensure that data is reliable. With that said, let me have another quick look at some of the questions that's mentioned. Yes, the really good point from Anthony on the gateway side and DataFlow limitations. There are some limitations, but it also depends on what sort of a license you have, whether you use a premium PPU. So it highly depends on some of the limitations that are available there. And that's also true for the available options, like the AI stuff is a premium only feature, for example. So yeah, with that said, anyone else, feel free. Let me just stop sharing my screen so you can see me as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to also unmute yourself if you're brave enough and just ask the question. And I can see one more question coming from the team, so let me have a quick look. Yes, that's a really good point. And once again, just confirming that DataFlows can help with that single source of truth. And once again, you have the option. It's not 101, so I'm not going to cover this today, but you do have the option to connect multiple DataFlows and in a sense, chain them based on how you want different segments or business units see different data sets. Good stuff.
Hey, Roland, I'm going to ask you a quick question that I don't see in the chat. What is the minimum level of requirement of security rights that somebody has to have to a workspace in order to be able to connect to the DataFlow?
I would say they have to be a contributor. Okay. To be absolutely honest with you, I'm fairly confident in that, but I never checked if someone below that can actually utilize a DataFlow from a workspace point of view.
Fair enough. Yeah, the good point is, the good news is they don't need to be an admin. They don't need to be able to and I can't remember what all the rules are. I got to go back and look at it, but no,
Yep.
that's good stuff. Awesome. I don't know if there's any other questions. Please feel free to drop them into the chat. Roland, thanks for coming and doing this. This is a fantastic presentation. Learned some new things. Really enjoyed it, and hopefully we can have you back in future to do another one as well. Connecting via Excel is also a great way of making data available for business users. Yes, it is.
Yes, yes.
We all love our Excel.
Yes, I purposefully wanted to mention Excel, but skip the part of connecting to that. But yeah, I think the slide number 2 or 3 where we had that data export 2, version 3, version 5, dates and stuff like that is really critical for business users. Making sure that we help them to connect to that single source of truth, the ultimate truth, and the most up-to-date version of the data is going to help them quite significantly to reduce the noise around creating those reports. And I can see a hand, or I saw a hand maybe. Yes, go ahead, please. Feel free to ask your question, definitely. No, okay. I was almost certain that there was a hand up. That's a good.
I just want to follow up just quickly on Jeff's comment too about Excel. The other thing that it's entirely possible there, if you're using Office 365, to connect to a data flow from Excel, which is kind of nice. You don't have to be in Power BI desktop in that. So that's another thing that's absolutely awesome, right? Let it be prepped centrally and then pull in what you need. So
yeah, that was the point I was making. I've been trying to teach a bunch of guys. They want to use Power BI, but they think it's easier. It looks easy, but once they started trying to use the desktop and then come to terms with some of the concepts, it sort of put them off. However, being able to bring pre-processed data flows or even data sets into Excel, into the more recent versions as a table, and then have it being pre-processed, then they work on it from there. They're much more comfortable in that environment.
Absolutely.
As people, as they tend to be.
Well, but again, right? I mean, it's like all things. I mean, there's Power BI jobs, there's Excel jobs, and there's certain things that should be done in one application over the other, but they always involve starting with data. So, that's the kind of cool thing there. So it's nice that we actually did give us access to them in both places. So,
Yes.
Tim's got his hand raised. Tim, what's up? Not quite hearing you there, Tim. Nope, still nothing. You're not muted on our side, so.
That's good
stuff. Technology is always awesome when it works, right? But not so much when it doesn't.
Yes. I was hoping that this demo will go very smoothly, because obviously live demo is always tricky,
especially against a web service. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm brave, as you can see. I'm very brave. I'm very confident. I'm very confident in DataFlows. But yeah, it's just something to be mindful of.
You haven't had that pleasant experience yet where you've been like getting ready to go and do your presentation, and there's a Microsoft service outage across the world that you're like, no, now what?
I remember one time there is a pop-up window when you do the edit credentials sign, and for whatever reason, doesn't matter what I tried, that pop-up window wasn't there. So obviously I couldn't refresh the aha moment at the very end where you saw the new data coming in wasn't there. So obviously it's missing that piece. It's still valuable, the whole content, but yeah, just something to be mindful of.
There you go. All right, so it looks like
hey Ken, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. There you go.
I had to change the setting. Just to save you, my last name is Weinzaffel.
Weinzaffel.
Yes, and if you butcher it, don't worry. But again, appreciate that call out. So.
No worries. Yeah. So coming up in a month or so, or in about a month actually, we've got Tim is going to be presenting this session as well. So yeah, looking forward to that. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in on this one, so I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks again, Roland, for coming and doing this. Really appreciate it. Once again, thanks to Joseph for hosting our What's New in Power BI for us. Appreciate that as well. And I will get this recording up and posted on Monday next week. I'm going to say I'm actually on vacation right now, so I'm going to enjoy the rest of that, and we'll get it posted and notify everyone through the Meetup site once it is available. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks again to our presenters for doing their fantastic jobs here, and we will see you all in the future.